Hello, good evening, and welcome to the Cover One Roundup. I am your host, David Faux, here to bring you a recap and a breakdown, all the stuff in between, of week one of training camp. Folks, football is coming back. It's not all the way back yet. Like there's a progression here, right? You have training camp, you have the preseason, then we finally get into the regular season. But I'll tell you what, it is so nice to actually have like real football things to do and to talk about. It's so much better than all this off-season nonsense that is just so annoying. I know I said all this last week, but it's so great to actually have a whole week in the books, and especially today, first day of pads. Awesome. I mean, you feel it in the air, you feel the anticipation. Football is coming back. And with that, of course, means that fantasy football is coming back. And if you're someone like me who really enjoys fantasy football season, you can join Underdog Fantasy to join their fantasy football season, because Cover One is once again excited to partner with the most dynamic name in fantasy football, and that is Underdog Fantasy. And if that one home league and that one draft each year is not enough for you, then Underdog Fantasy is for you. It's all the fun of drafting your own players, but without the waivers and the lineup decisions. And all these best ball drafts allow you to have all the fun of drafting your team, all the chances to win big with none of the week-to-week hassle. If you use promo code COVER1, that's the number one, when signing up to make your first deposit, Underdog will match that deposit up to $100. That is 100 free US dollars if you use promo code COVER1. It's a great fantasy website. We're very happy to have renewed our contract with Underdog Fantasy. Y'all head over there. It's a great site. You're gonna do great stuff. We'll kind of, not to tease anything, but we'll expand a little bit more on what we can do on Underdog Fantasy in future shows. But go to Underdog Fantasy, great sponsor of the show. You're helping them, you're helping us. What more could you want? Plus, you get to play fantasy football. So sign up today and start winning today. We are going to basically kind of just jump right into it. We're going to get into news first, since that kind of was and is the original purpose of this show, is to talk about news. And one of the more interesting things that we have had happen since training camp started in terms of news, at least from last week. Obviously, we had Nyheim Hines' injury right before training camp start. And now we have former Cardinals second-round receiver Andy Isabella, who has now signed with the team and seems to be in competition for the lead return role. This is interesting. Obviously, Andy Isabella, if you know anything about him, when he came into the league, super fast, super agile type of guy. Deontay Hardy is probably not the best comparison, but it's not that far off either. I think that the Andy Isabella signing is interesting. I wouldn't read too much into that overall, just because, I mean, this is already a pretty crowded receiver room. It's kind of hard to break into this roster from that position. Now, if they decide to bring Isabella on as a returner, then that I think also signals like Deontay Hardy is progressing well and is doing what they want to do on offense. I think that we're gonna get into these comments, because that is kind of the next thing on the news agenda. We'll talk about this RJ Anspan. We'll get there. But with Isabella, I think that if he does end up making the roster, which I don't think is that likely, it probably means that Hardy is like really doing what they want to do on offense. Yeah, he's a major important piece of that, along with Khalil Shakir, because Khalil Shakir is in competition for that return role as well. So I really do think that it's an interesting signing. We'll see how interesting as the preseason rolls along. As to what happened today, well, this is a great intro for it. As RJ puts here, curious what McDermott said to Dorsey today. I bet it went like, "Hey Ken, love the creativity finally, but can we not let our star quarterback get lit up in a training camp practice?" For those of you who are unaware of what happened today, it seems that the Bills and Ken Dorsey wanted to run a trick play during practice. Again, this is a live period. It's pads. You get to have fun. Well, I don't know about fun, but it's a lot more interesting than just jerseys and shorts. but it also means contact. It means hitting. And, normally a quarterback is wearing the red jersey. Red jersey means you don't contact them. You don't contact them because they're the quarterback. If any of you are Hard Knocks people, it's a great scene with the Browns from like long time ago. Oh gosh, I don't want to date myself, but 8 years ago, let's say, where where somebody's hitting whoever is playing quarterback for the Browns at that point, and Todd Haley is getting all mad, like, "Oh, good teams don't hit the quarterback. Good teams don't hit the quarterback." And Greg Williams, the defensive coordinator, says, "Well, somebody's got to block him, don't it? Like, they got to block him." Anyway, that's all to say that, like, you don't hit quarterbacks during practice, and which is unfortunate because that's exactly what happened to Josh Allen, because they ran a play where he ended up being the target, and Torrance Jones came across, made a big hit on him. He went down for a little bit. Didn't seem to be actually injured. Some people seem to speculate that he just kind of got the wind knocked out of him. Regardless of what did or did not actually happen injury-wise, it's probably not totally necessary to run a trick play like that during practice. I don't get that. And then the other part of this really is, and that's something that's kind of getting buried here, what's Zarin Johnson doing? Like, is he just being like way too instinctual? Like, did he try to hit Josh Allen? Did he just like not think about it? I don't really know what was going on there. Regardless, the Bills are very fortunate that nothing really happened. It was just down for a couple of seconds, came back up. Everything seemed to be fine. He saw on the injury report. He wasn't, didn't go back to the locker room or anything. He was totally fine. Andrew Castiglia, thank you. And great advice to everyone. Smash that like button, y'all. It does help. I don't like saying it, mostly because I keep forgetting to say it. But the like buttons, comments, all that, we love it. It really helps with the algorithm, that pesky little bugger of an algorithm that just wants to bury everyone. Not really, but we really do appreciate any likes, comments. I really do appreciate it. It's great for us. It's just, it's a very weird thing. This is another great point by RJ. It's cool running a trick play, Philly special, whatever. Maybe save that for a day without pads and hitting. Yeah, probably. Yeah, you had a whole week to kind of work on stuff like that. Break it out during then when nobody's gonna, but whatever. Stephen will also, another interesting point. Hopefully Dorsey communicates to McDermott that he was going to run somewhere in practice. McDermott could have freshened D's mind not to kill a QB. Based on some things that I saw, it seemed to be like it wasn't intentional for Torrance Jones to just like go in and light up Josh Allen. It's hard to say. I wasn't there. I didn't see it. All I saw was a bunch of people tweeting like, "Oh, Josh Allen went down. He got hit. Blah blah blah. Etc. So overall, this is not a huge deal. Mostly just because nothing came out of it, but it's also a lesson to learn. Maybe don't put your quarterback in harm's way as long as you need to. Another important bit of information from today: Tamar Hamlin. It was the first day of pads, and he was out there with that team. He spoke to the media afterwards. He said, there was some nervousness, which is understandable. I mean, I frankly, I mean, just from my own perspective and my own view of things, I don't know how he manages to do this, because if it were me, I would just be scared out of my mind to do this. But truly, more power to him for him to be able and willing to do the thing that he loves, to not be afraid of what seemed to be a sort of a 1 in a million thing to have happen. And obviously that's on his mind. It would be hard for it not to be, but it's very, very cool to see him out there, to see him participating, to just be able to do this and have the right mentality. It's very cool. And it's probably a press conference worth looking at if you can find it on Twitter or YouTube. I don't know exactly. Their Bills aren't like super consistent with putting up press conferences in places that are easy to find, but if you can, that's probably a press conference worth looking at. It's great to see Tamar out there, and hopefully he can take steps to get on the field this year and play some real snaps. It's gonna be great seeing him back on the field. All right, Andrew Castiglia, bringing up the question that we need to get into: biggest winner of camp so far. It is a weekend. it might be too early to really sit there and say, oh, this guy's a winner, this guy's a loser, etc. But there have been several standouts from training camp so far. And the first one is an important one because he was this year's first round pick, and that is Dalton Kincaid. I feel like every time, every day since training camp has started, I've seen so many tweets just extolling praise about Dalton Kincaid. And rightfully so, because this was the guy that you drafted. And this was the guy that you took in the first round. This is somebody who was super high on a lot of people's boards that a lot of people thought very, very highly of. I mean, there's a reason why Daniel Jeremiah, longtime NFL scout, longtime analyst, really trusted guy in this industry, had him as a top 10 player in this draft. I mean, this is a legitimate player who fell to the Bills, who is now in a position to really be doing something important for this Bills team. We talked this offseason about how much they missed having some sort of presence over the middle. And that didn't just involve putting Stephon Diggs into the slot and, making something happen with him there. This is somebody who, if he is able to contribute in year one, it becomes a huge part of this offense because it allows them to do certain things and still run a lot of the spread concepts that they love doing with Dorsey and did before with Dayball. I mean, they bring in Cole Beasley. They wanted Isaiah McKenzie to be the guy after Cole Beasley left. McKenzie didn't end up being the guy. They weren't ready with Shakir. Shakir wasn't ready. It became a whole thing. They just couldn't find a consistent guy, a consistent presence to be in the slot. Well, now you have somebody who seems to be just like ready to go. I mean, it just seems like every day it's been, this is how smooth he is. This is how consistent he's been. He's got great hands. He's, reaching for things. He's doing super well. And that's all great. I mean, this is exactly what you want to hear coming out of training camp. This is the sort of thing that you want out of a first round pick. You want immediate contributions. You don't always get immediate contributions, right? Especially from the tight end position, which is a very slow moving position to develop. I think it's really interesting. And again, as the president of the Rob Boras fan club, I'm so glad that Kincaid has ended up in a place like Buffalo where he has someone like Rob Boras, but also has somebody like Dawson Knox, who was also super raw coming out of Ole Miss and has really learned how to become a really well-rounded tight end in the NFL. And I think for someone like Kincaid, who has a really good skill set as a receiver already and looks so natural and smooth in that regard, all the other stuff that comes with being a tight end, and even a quote-unquote receiving tight end like he is, you still need to be able to do certain things like block in space in particular. Blocking in space is going to be different from blocking in line, because when you're blocking in line, obviously you're going right against big guys, defensive ends, you're going against, bigger linebackers, that sort of thing. Whereas in space, you're going against safeties, you're going against corners. You might be going against some linebackers, but, it's probably closer to like a Matt Milano type rather than a Tremaine Edmonds type, somebody who's a little bit leaner, quicker, faster, but somebody that you still match up with relatively well from a size perspective. And with Kincaid, if he can just figure out how to do that in year one, I mean, you're seriously looking at somebody that can really legitimately help transform this offense in a major way. So hearing all of these early reports about Kincaid has been spectacular. It's been such a wonderful thing to hear. I'm really excited to see what Kincaid is going to be able to do in the regular season. We'll see how he does in the preseason, how much run he's able to get in the preseason. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Another guy that seems to be doing pretty well in training camp, off-maligned Gabe Davis, or maybe not off-maligned, but just like very controversial player, like legitimate controversial player. Because there are people who feel that Gabe Davis is a legitimately decent and good wide receiver too. There's other people who would rather trade him for some rando pick or whatever. But Gabe Davis seems to be playing at a really high level so far at training camp, which is a very good thing to see. I think that, it wasn't until after the season where we saw that Gabe Davis had a high ankle sprain that he was dealing with for a lot of the season. I think that really does affect things in so many. It just affects how you play the game. It really does. I mean, you can't run the way that you really want to. You can't cut the way that you really want to when you're probably just constantly thinking about like protecting that part of your leg, your ankle, and that kind of it can force some concentration issues, some focus issues. You're not at 100%, which means I don't think that you can focus at 100%. So I think that Davis, who is of course going into a contract year, and the Bills are also probably looking at him and saying, hey, we really like Gabe Davis. We probably like him than most of our fans seem to like him. But the other thing is that this Bills team has some money issues, at least moving forward. And especially after signing Ed Oliver, which I don't think anyone was really expecting them to do, looking forward to 2024, it's like, are you really able to pay Gabe Davis? And if you don't, do you feel comfortable in a Justin Shorter being the guy to sort of replace those reps? Who knows? I mean, it's tough. It's a tough thing. But regardless of all of the future talk, right now, Gabe Davis looks pretty good, and that's a good sign. And what's interesting is he had a press conference in the middle of the week last week, and he basically brought up the fact that, the types of routes that he runs, the types of targets that he gets, tend to be more low percentage types of throws and catches. So there's going to be a certain level of, it's just a lower percentage play for him to be able to make. And they're big plays when he makes them, obviously. You look at the Steelers game, right, where he had those 2 big touchdowns. And he can make big plays, and he can do certain things really, really well. But they're also really low percentage plays that require that require a tough catch a lot of the time, and they require a really good throw. And a good throw requires time in the pocket. It requires timing with the receiver. It requires you being able to separate as a receiver. There's a lot of things that happen on those sorts of plays, as opposed to like, a quick blaze out or something like that only requires less than 3 seconds, if that. There's certain things that Davis should be able to do, or is probably capable of doing, that they just don't really ask of him, because he's really good at doing those sort of low percentage plays. But I think the perception of that sort of makes people think that he's not as good as he actually is. And I think that that's a little unfair to him. And he more or less said that. He didn't say it necessarily in those words, but he basically said that, like, I can do the things that they ask Diggs to do. And if I did, people would probably say that, I wasn't dropping the ball as much, or that I could, because these are higher percentage throws, these are higher percentage plays. My overall, grade, if you're a PFF person, that sort of thing, would probably be higher. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting seeing Gabe Davis sort of push back on the narratives that have been around him, which of course, means kind of confirms what we always know about football players, which is that even if they don't respond publicly on things like Twitter or Instagram, they do see what you put out there. Just a general friendly reminder from your local podcast, your local Bills podcast. These are all people. Even though they are making millions and millions of dollars, and it'll be more money than any of us see in our lifetime, they're still people, and they still deal with things, and they don't necessarily like being called horrible, garbage, and that they're bad at their job, etc., etc., etc. So when the next time you're on social media, and this goes for me as well, just have that in mind. Just treat people the way you want to be treated. The golden rule, brought to you by the Cover One Roundup and Jesus, probably. Moving on, we're going to talk about defense now, because there's 2 guys that are standing out for me, and it's probably not the guys that you would be expecting me to talk about. I'm sure we'll get to some guys that you want me to talk about, but there's 2 guys that I want to talk about. First being Tyrell Dotson. Now, I'm not talking about Tyrell Dotson because I think that he has been playing well in training camp. Maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. I just haven't really heard anything about it. But what I do think is that with Tyrell Dotson seemingly getting a lot of the first team snaps at Mike linebacker, that seems to be a pretty strong indicator of where the Bills are leaning on who to assume that role after Tremaine Edmunds' departure to the Bears. I do think that this is sort of what we predicted, given that the options outside of Dotson are an undersized guy in Terrell Bernard and a rookie in Dorian Williams. And we'll talk a little bit more about Dorian Williams later. But for now, I mean, Dotson has been on this team. He's made play calls before when Tremaine Edmunds has been hurt. It wouldn't surprise me if he's the week 1 starter. It also wouldn't surprise me if they decide to go in a different direction, 4 weeks into the season or something like that. Dotson can do certain things well, but overall, especially in today's NFL, where you need to be really good in coverage, especially as a linebacker, you need to be able to do that. If you can't do that, you're just going to be far more limited than teams want you to be. And maybe the Bills kind of work their way around that in certain ways. Maybe this is where Taylor Rapp comes in, right? On certain obvious passing situations, you bring him in, you take Dotson out, maybe have Hyde communicate the defense if that needs to be the case. It gets a little tricky, and there's certain solutions, but one thing that's going to be a quote unquote solution to something is also going to present other problems. In reality, there are no solutions to things, right? There's just trade-offs, right? So hypothetically speaking, if you made a Tyrell Dotson a 2-down linebacker, essentially, right? And then you play 3rd down and dime and you take out Dotson and bring in Taylor Rapp. Well, if Dotson's been the one who's communicating to the defense, who's now communicating to the defense of the green dot? Because I don't think you can have multiple people wearing the green dot. And if you can't do that, then you can't take Dotson off the field. So then do you have somebody like Milano call the defense? Do you have somebody like Hyde call the defense, or Poyer, whoever? There's just trade-offs. This is the sort of thing that you kind of have to figure out in things like in the off season with mini camp, with training camp, and these coaches meetings. You need to be able to figure that stuff out. And if they feel comfortable enough to leave Dotson out there because he is the green dot and he has to be able to be out there, then that's what they need to do. But that also means that there's going to be a target on Dotson on those sort of situations, and you're going to have to provide help for him in certain ways. And maybe, and honestly, maybe that means just blitzing Dotson in those situations, so you don't have to worry about him in coverage. You just send him and go at it, but you also can't do that all the time, because then that becomes a predictable thing, and then you just throw hot against the blitz. Again, there's trade-offs, and you just need to be able to find as many ways to curb the weaknesses and play to player strengths. That's what good coaches do, and I think the Bills should hopefully be able to do that. The other player that seems to be making some waves in the last couple of days has been Greg Rousseau. And what's really interesting is that they lined him up at defensive tackle in certain plays. And this is very interesting because if you go back to his tape at Miami in college, he got a lot of sacks. He had one season that he played at Miami. He had 15 and a half sacks. He had a lot of sacks that came when he was aligned in a 0 or 1 technique against the center and just worked against those interior guys. And having that sort of change-up ability for your defensive end, especially somebody as long and as technically sound as Rousseau is very, very interesting. And I think it allows you to play it allows you to play games with the defense, right? Because not only do you have somebody like Greg Rousseau who could really present some matchup issues with that particular style by putting him at defensive tackle, you also have somebody like Ed Oliver who is super athletic, and for a play or two, you could probably get away with him playing defensive end. At the very least, what you could do is just do the normal stunts that if you're unfamiliar. Well, for those that are unfamiliar, you have your tackle, you have your end, and a stunt would be maybe the tackle taking a step this way and then coming crashing inside, so that actually no, let's reverse that. Forget everything I said. The end coming up and then across the tackle's face so he can crash down and occupy both the tackle and the guard, and then the defensive tackle looping around that and creating a free lane for the defensive tackle to make a play in the backfield. So playing those sorts of games, which I don't think the Bills do a lot of or haven't done a lot of with Leslie Frazier as the defensive coordinator, and maybe that changes a little bit more with Sean McDermott. I would like to see more of that, especially with the amount of athleticism that they have at the defensive line position right now. And as some people have talked about, Steve Noble says, I've seen a ton of reports that Floyd has been extremely disruptive. Has he been that disruptive, or have we just sucked at right tackle? That's a great question. And RJ with a great response. From what I saw, Floyd was having success against Brown and Dawkins since they were moving him around. And again, when you have somebody who's versatile, when you have players that are versatile, when you have players that are athletic, when you have guys that can do a lot of different things, especially on the defensive line, it allows you to play so many different games. It allows you to do so many different things that you wouldn't normally be able to do. You have so many different packages. It allows you to be a little bit more unpredictable. That's what you want on defense. You don't want predictability. You don't want to be dictated to most of the time. And certain defenses run that way, right? You could say that the Bills defense sort of was what that was about, right? Like sort of just taking those little nicks and cuts because you know they're never going to finish the job, right? They're not going to be successful in the red zone. And for the most part, like that has been the case with Leslie Frazier's defense. But I think McDermott has a different mentality, which is we don't want to just sit back and let them dictate to us. We want to be able to create plays. We want to be disruptive. We want to play games within the game. We want to do different tactics to allow the overall strategy to flourish. We want to be able to prevent points and we want to be able to create turnovers, but we don't want to do that by just doing the exact same things every time. Otherwise, a team that is really good at game planning and really good at adjusting and really good at play calling, let's say the Chiefs or the Bengals, could really pick you apart when the time when it comes into crunch time. And I think that could really force the Bills to do some different things that they have not done in years past. And I'm very excited to see exactly what a McDermott defense is going to look like outside of Leslie Frazier. I think Greg Rousseau being able to do certain things like that, being, coming inside, is going to really help that. I think it's going to be really, really great. RJ, again, great comment. From what I've seen so far, ton of stunts being run. Groot on the inside, moved to the outside. Even Ed stunning to the outside looked nice. This is what I want. This is what I love seeing. Not everything needs to be some engage 8 blitz. Not everything needs to be, we're going to drop 3 defensive linemen into coverage and blitz all of our DBs and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't need to be some wackadoodle insane thing. It just needs to be really smart, well-executed stunts and games and pressures that are just different, simulated pressures where you're bringing guys into the A gap. This is something that one of my coaching buddies, Tyler, has talked about before, where one of the things that offensive guys hate, one of the things that defensive coordinators seem to emphasize a lot is forcing that center right in the middle to just think as much as possible about who and what is coming from where. So if you have, he's already got 2 guys in front of him, more than likely, especially in this particular defense, he will, Daquan Jones, Poona Ford, and then Ed Oliver and whoever else, maybe Jordan Phillips. And then if you're walking guys up like Tyrell Dotson, like Matt Milano, and you don't know who's going into which gap right off the bat, it gets tricky. It just is. You have to force a defense to be, or hold on, reverse that. You have to force an offense to look at you and say, we don't always know where everything's coming from. We might have an idea, we might have a guess, but we don't always know the answer. And I think that's what they need to be able to do with this defense. I'm hoping that that's what Sean McDermott is able to bring to this defense. It would be great. Steve Noble says, I am convinced that if the D could stay healthy, they have an opportunity to be elite. I am kind of with you on that, because I think just across the board, really the biggest question mark in my mind is just the Mike linebacker, because there's no clear starter at that position. But at every other spot, there's tons of talent on this defensive line. Matt Milano's an all-pro. Micah Hyde being back healthy, Jordan Poyer, even though these guys are in their 30s, they're still really good. Their game is not built on athleticism. It's built on being in sync with each other. It's built on communication. It's built around, knowing what the other guy is doing. You have Trey White now back full off season. I think he's going to be really, really good. And then you have CB2. And, even if there's no clear and distinct answer at CB2 right now, you still have really good options in someone super athletic like Kaiir Elam. You have the steady veteran in Dane Jackson, and you have somebody that can come in and play like Christian Benford. So I think overall this, and of course, Taron Johnson, who is probably the best nickel corner in the NFL, if not one, at the very least, it's like top 3. I'm not sure. I mean, maybe Kenny Moore with Indianapolis, but overall, this defense is just super talented. If they stay healthy, health was such a big issue last year. If they stay healthy, I think this is a really, really good defense. We're going to move on. So those were the standouts that I kept seeing pop up throughout the week. Those were the guys that I kept seeing. I was really excited to see those guys. We're going to move on to question marks. I didn't want to do like stock up, stock down. I think I said that in the tweet when I tweeted this out earlier, kind of reframing this as standouts and question marks, because it's 1 week of camp. I don't want to say like, oh, I'm super concerned that Kaiir Elam is bad, or that's not really the case. It's 1 week of training camp. We haven't even gotten through the preseason. Let's be reasonable here. Reason will prevail. So question marks. First thing, Dorian Williams, 3rd round pick this year from Tulane. There seemed to be a lot of confusion between the front office and the coaching staff on what Dorian Williams would be doing for this team. And right now, it doesn't seem like he's competing for the Mike linebacker spot. It seems like that's going to be Klein or Bernard or Dotson, probably Dotson. And it seems like Dorian Williams is learning how to be the backup wheel linebacker and probably playing special teams as well, which is fine, I guess. But it's also bringing up the question, of course, back-to-back years where they've taken an off-ball linebacker with their 3rd round pick, and it just sort of feels like no one seems to really know what to do with both of these guys. If it had just been one or the other, that would be one thing. But with both of these guys, it's sort of like none of these guys are very clear, stand out, like this is the Mike linebacker of the future. And when that's the case, it's sort of like, now what are you going to do here? And that's sort of how you end up in a position where Tyrell Dotson is now probably going to be your starting Mike linebacker in week 1. But regardless of that, I think that, we've sort of talked about, I know Eric has talked about it, the defense that Dorian Williams ran or was playing in at Tulane was not anything all that complicated. And the adjustment to the NFL is probably going to be pretty different. It's probably going to take a lot of time for him to really fully adjust to what he needs to do. And I think that when there are other options available to you, and actually, Jessica almost missed this comment. Specter looked great. Another name for that Mike linebacker spot. Specter has been playing with the first team, as Jessica says. I mean, there's a lot of guys. There's a lot of guys competing for that spot right now. It seems like, like we said, Dotson seems to be the front runner there, but there are guys in that spot. And I think that it's going to be tricky. It's going to be interesting to see how this all shakes out. It is interesting that Specter has been running with the first team on this defense as the Mike linebacker. He was the 7th round pick last year. He seemed in the preseason, obviously a special teams guy, but also when he played on defense with 2nd and 3rd string, he seemed to be like physical. He seemed to be moving downhill. He didn't seem to be afraid of any of what he needed to do. Ultimately, he was a 7th round pick for a reason, but I think that he's an interesting player and could have, maybe it's just the mystery behind Jalen Specter that kind of allows us to be a little bit more hopeful about him versus a Tyrell Dotson that we've already seen, right? Like we know what Tyrell Dotson is. We know what he brings to the table. We have tape on Tyrell Dotson. Whereas with Jalen Specter, it's like, hey, if this guy can kind of do certain things, maybe he can do other things. That's the mystery box effect. But maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. And in my opinion, I think the coaching staff probably has a better gauge on what he can or cannot do than most of us do. And if they decide to start Tyrell Dotson right now, it wouldn't surprise me. And that's sort of what I'm expecting them to do. Whether or not that stays throughout the whole season, we'll see. And guys like Dorian Williams could be in the mix, if or when Matt Milano misses his, typical 1 or 2 games that he seems to miss every year. I think that, having Dorian Williams, somebody that at the very least you feel confident in as a talent wise player, I think that's more interesting than just sort of throwing whoever out there to sort of replace Milano. Anyway, so that's all that. Another interesting battle that's been happening is in the offensive line, and that's with Ryan Bates and Osiris Torrance. And it seems to be a pretty even split between the two. Ryan Bates obviously has the versatility that they like on this team. They really like versatile players on this team. But Osiris Torrance, first of all, there's been some consistent reports that Torrance seems to have slimmed down a bit. When he was at the Senior Bowl, I think he was around 330, 340, something in that range. Does not seem to be at that heavy of a weight, which is a good thing. Obviously, Torrance's game is more power rather than finesse as an offensive lineman. Whereas Bates probably is more of a finesse offensive lineman. They're offensive linemen. I hate calling offensive linemen finesse because they're still, 300 plus pounds and can crush you into a beetle if they really wanted to. But, there is a difference between a Ryan Bates and somebody like Osiris Torrance in the way that they play. And I think that it seems that the Bills are at the very least willing to see what Osiris Torrance can do as a guard in his first year, which seems to be a sign that they feel relatively confident in him. They don't feel like he's going to be a total mess. They seem to feel like he's taking on coaching, I'm guessing, really well. And I think with somebody like Aaron Kromer, I think that's an important thing. And with Aaron Kromer, I think that something that I've noticed is from what I've seen from people at training camp has been that he seems to be really focusing on Torrance and Spencer Brown, which he should. I'm glad that he is. I believe Eric or Anthony, maybe Greg, one of these guys tweeted out that after a certain rep, Spencer Brown was brought back to just do it again because Kromer wanted him to do it better in a more specific way. And that's good. And it didn't seem like he was doing that with other players. So that's very interesting. I think with Torrance, he's somebody that doesn't necessarily fit that Aaron Kromer mold, right? So I think that this is somebody that he's really taking on, and it'll be interesting to see how well he fits with this particular style of coach and this particular style of play. It's going to be really interesting. I'm really excited about the fact that they are willing to give him first team reps. Last week when they were just doing jerseys and shorts, and today at the first day of pads, he was out there with the first team. He wasn't out there the whole time. But it also wouldn't surprise me if they ran a bit of a rotation. And that maybe that's something we need to talk about is the idea of maybe they swing these guys around a little bit. And maybe they bring in Torrance and then they bring in Bates as like an extra blocker type. And so the idea of like 12 and 13 personnel gets expanded and evolved a little bit more. It's an interesting thought. It's something that could be very, very different and add an extra wrinkle to things for this team. That's sort of how Ryan Bates actually became more part of this roster, was that he just sort of became the extra blocker on those heavier sets. And that's sort of how they brought him along. And now he's, a starting guard for this team. And if they decide to swing him around a little bit more, I'm totally okay with that too, because at the very least, you don't want to trade or be rid of Ryan Bates just because he has so much inherent value as a player because he's so versatile. And that's something that is a very important thing. It's hard to find competent offensive line in play in this league at this point, much less to have somebody who can, legitimately play at different spots. If Mitch Morse goes down with, some sort of injury, God forbid another concussion, he can step in and play center. Ryan Bates can play center and do it pretty well, relatively speaking. He can play guard. He can, if you really are in a bind, maybe he can play tackle, but they also have other guys like, Dave Questenberry and who's the guy that got from the Dolphins? Brandon Shell. Yeah. And so I doubt that they're planning on putting Bates out there at tackle at a given point in time. But it is important to have guys that are versatile in that interior. I think that keeping Ryan Bates allows you to do a lot of different things. And, I wouldn't hang him out as trade bait, which is something that I suggested earlier this year, especially after they drafted Torrance. I was kind of like, where's Ryan Bates fit in all this? But apparently he seems to fit in pretty well with what the Bills want to do. So it's very interesting to see that battle between Torrance and Ryan Bates. This is a great question. This is a great question. Ralph Wilson Sr. coming from the grave to tell us this. Torrance has noticeably slimmed down. Hope Bills don't ruin him like they did at Vanessa. So this is a great point, and it's a great point to bring up because Torrance, while he definitely wins with more strength and power, and that comes when you're a little bit heavier, I do think that slimming down probably, I'm guessing, I haven't seen Torrance. I don't know what his exact numbers are. Only the Bills really know all this. But if he slimmed down 15, 20 pounds, and maybe that's the case here, that seems to be a reasonable guess. If that's the case, he probably still possesses that same strength and power that he had at that heavier weight. Maybe just a little fractionally less, maybe. But I think ultimately, if that allows him to move better, especially move to the second level, then that's a great thing. That's what you want. That's what especially with this particular style of offense, especially given that they ran one of the things that they ended up being really successful with in terms of their run game last year was those James Cook mid-zone runs. And that force that requires your offensive lineman to be able to be nimble, to be able to read what's in front of them, pass things off, and then head to the second level when they can. And if Torrance is a little bit lighter on his feet, when he's able to do that, even better. And what's more important than maybe even that is if you're lighter on your feet, that's better that translates so much better for pass protection, because you need to be able to mirror and match what's going on in front of you when the defensive tackle is trying to bowl right through you or spin across from you if they're Aaron Donald. You got to be able to respond quickly. You can't just be committing completely to one side and then get caught flat-footed when they come back on the other side. You need to be able to do certain things. As this relates to Epinesa, the difference is, with Epinesa, him fluctuating his weight the way that they wanted him to do was just sort of screwing with how he won in college. They took this guy who won with a lot of power and tried to make him into a speed rusher. And that doesn't really make any sense. And that's not what's really happening with O'Cyrus Torrance. They're not trying to make O'Cyrus Torrance into a different style of player. They just want him to bring that same sort of style, but be a little bit more athletic, a little bit more nimble, so that they can still do a lot of the other things that they do. And I think that that's fine. And they're not trying to completely transform O'Cyrus Torrance and turn him into a completely different player like they were doing with AJ Epinesa. AJ Epinesa's whole story was just totally competing ideas going into into different seasons, and it just really screwed with how he ended up playing. And hopefully that changes. Maybe now they've finally settled on something, and maybe he does well this year, and that would be great. But I do think that this is not necessarily the most comparable situation. And I think that, I think Torrance slimming down is a good thing. It's not like an AJ Epinesa where it's kind of like, we'll see how this goes. We'll see if that really translates well. X breached to the sock. I don't know what this X breached the toss X. I don't really know what this username is. I'm just gonna call you X. X says Epinesa is this generation's Zarin Maven tweener, too big to be a linebacker, too small to be a defensive end. Okay. I want you to go back and rewatch both AJ Epinesa and Aaron Maven, and then come back next week. If you think they are still the same player, you say it loud and proud with your chest, because personally don't see that at all. Like we could talk about AJ Epinesa being a somewhat disappointing player in his first couple of years in the NFL, but Aaron Maven was not an NFL player. Like, I'm sorry, he just was not an NFL player. There's no reason for him to have been the 11th overall pick in that draft. There was no reason for him to have been a starter in the NFL. Just not the guy. He was not athletic. He was not big. He was not anything. He was a bad football player. But with AJ Epinesa, I do think like he's at least shown some flashes of who he was as a player in college. I think that he can do something in the NFL. I think that his is more just like trying to figure out how they want him to win in the NFL. Okay, this makes a lot more sense. Breach the TOS, breach the terms of service. I get banned a lot. LMAO. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Thank you for clarifying. I won't ban you from this chat. Thank you for the clarification on that. Yeah, so again, going back to the original point, Bates versus Torrance. Very interesting to see how this is going. Glad both of them are getting first team reps. Glad that the Bills seem to be comfortable with both of them. We'll see how that all shakes out. CB2. So we're going to talk about it. Now we're going to talk about it. Dane Jackson, Kaiir Elam. It's very interesting because the first day or two at camp, it seemed that Dane Jackson has that grip on that job, which again, not that surprising. They like veteran DBs at that spot. They also gave Kaiir Elam some first team reps. It seems like this is a legitimate competition between the two. And I think going back to the Tyrell Dotson discussion, it wouldn't surprise me if they roll with the veteran first. If we end up in week one and Dane Jackson is starting across from Trey White, wouldn't surprise me a bit. And it wouldn't make me overly concerned about Kaiir Elam either. Obviously practice is something that is very important to this coaching staff. It's important to pretty much every NFL coaching staff. If you don't practice well, you're probably not going to see the field. It's just how it is. But I do think that someone like Elam, as long as he continues to work hard, as long as he continues, which, coming into the draft, coming into this team, it seemed like character was a big thing for him. It's always been a big thing for the Bills. It's why they draft a lot of these guys. I think that character and work ethic, as long as he keeps going, as long as he keeps moving, as long as that persistence keeps up, I think eventually he's going to get through. I think he's going to end up securing that CB2 job. I just don't know it's going to be directly out of training camp. It's going to be interesting. And the preseason is probably going to show us more than we're expecting in this regard. You know what I mean? I think that that's going to show their hand a little bit on where they're leaning more towards. I'd be, again, expecting Dane Jackson more than Kaiir Elam in terms of week one of the regular season. But I do think Kaiir Elam is the future CB2. If they really felt like Dane Jackson was that important to this team, they probably would have given him more than just the 1-year tender offer, as Dane Jackson was a restricted free agent. But Kaiir Elam, I mean, you take him in the first round, you feel good about his athleticism, about his character, about his work ethic. At a certain point, that's just going to come together. It may not be right away, it may not be right now, but at a certain point, that's all going to come together. And I think that he's going to be a really good player as long as that keeps going. Just, persistence reveals the path. If nobody has played Jedi Fallen Order from a couple of years ago, it's one of the important quotes from the Jedi Master Jaro Tapal. Yeah, just because Kyle left does not mean we're not talking about Star Wars every once in a while on this podcast. Sorry to disappoint you if you thought otherwise. But yeah, it's an interesting discussion. I think that Elam's athleticism really lends more creativity to this defense. It will probably allow you to create better matchups for your defense. But again, one of the big things with this defense, whether we're talking about Leslie Frazier, whether we're talking about Sean McDermott, you're going to have to be able to communicate. You're going to have to be able to work with the other DBs to make sure that you are able to be in the right spot and be where you're supposed to be. You can't just sit there and guess. You can't take a bunch of gambles and risks. There's only so much that Poyer and Hyde can do to cover for you if you're jumping a bunch of routes. But I do think that it's interesting to think that, Elam can really help transform this defense into something different. And I think that if I'm the Bills, I think that, maybe you look at this as a rotation thing, like they're doing with Torrance and Bates potentially. I think that you could rotate these two, because that would not be the first time where they've done that, right? I mean, back in 2019, when Trey White was in his third year, right? And they had Levi Wallace, they had Kevin Johnson. I mean, you had guys, both of them were very capable of playing. I felt that Kevin Johnson was the better overall player, but they just rotated Johnson with Wallace because they felt comfortable with that rotation. I think you could see something like that. Maybe you see Kyer Elam as like a 60% rotation with Dane Jackson being 40%. I think that would be fine. And then going from there, the longer the season progresses, as long as Kyer Elam feels good, and as long as you feel good about Kyer Elam and how he's going about this, I think that you could see him more in that 70, 80, 90% set, as sort of what you would expect from a normal starting corner, especially a CB2. I think that's really interesting. I think that it's going to be a really good battle between those two. It's going to be really interesting to see who comes out on top. As Vince, every time the Bills have run that stupid Philly special, they lose that game. They do it in the Houston playoff game and that Arizona Hail Murray game. Both L's throw that play away. Both of those were for touchdowns and not the reason why they lost the game. I understand that there's like superstitions and we all have our own little voodoo things that we're into when it comes to sports. This seems a bit far-fetched in my opinion, but it is what it is, and we'll see what happens there. So that is probably going to be it. If there's anything else you all want to discuss, just feel free to throw it out there. I'm going to do a very quick read, because one of the things that we are so grateful for when it comes to doing this podcast and just creating stuff for this channel really is you guys. And one of the ways that you guys support us, obviously, likes, subscriptions, whether it's on YouTube or on whatever platform you're listening on. I can talk. That's only my job here. But one of the other ways that you guys support us is with OnePass, which is our premium service that we provide to our wonderful fans that are willing to pay the sum of $57 a year. And what is this going to get you? That's a great question. It's going to get you exclusive members-only content, which will get you more in-depth analysis, more scheme breakdown, more player breakdowns. You get scouting reports. You get this great community of fans in the Cover One Slack channel. You get all sorts of stuff. I mean, there's whole bunches of different communities that are building in that Slack channel. You can talk about a myriad of topics that get discussed in that Slack channel. It's really great. It's really worth it. You're not going to find another place like Cover One, and that will provide the service that we do for $57 a year. It's just not going to happen. It's really great. I really would not push this as much as I do, and with as much enthusiasm as I do, if I didn't actually believe in this being a great value. And I'm really, really hoping that we get more of you guys in that Slack channel. I'm hoping we get more people just realizing what a great experience it is to be a part of this community. Again, $57 a year. You also get a nice t-shirt and a decal. What can be more fun than that? Probably some other stuff, but whatever. It's still pretty cool. Sign up with OnePass. You're gonna love it. You're really, really gonna love it. All right. Let's see. This is a good question. Could Kincaid, this is from Leonard Eicher, could Kincaid be higher on the depth chart than Knox in 2024? That I don't know if it's necessarily a depth chart thing. I mean, first of all, I think that Knox is probably better than Kincaid overall, right? Like, Kincaid is probably going to end up as the better receiver, but Knox is definitely better as a blocker right now. That's for sure. And I think going into year 5 for Knox, I believe? Yeah, something like that. That will continue to improve. And Kincaid's just not there yet, and I don't think he's ever going to quite be at that level that Knox is at the moment in terms of a blocker. But I think that sort of viewing it in that way, in that sort of, Madden depth chart-esque sort of way, is not really the way to view this tight end room. When you have two legitimately strong, starting caliber tight ends, it's not so much about who's starting and who's not. It's more about how they get used. Both of these guys are going to get a lot of playing time. They're both going to get a lot of snaps throughout the season. It's more a matter of how they end up getting used. Knox is going to be more overall. You need somebody in line to help block for pass protection. You need somebody in line to help, wall off defenders on an outside run. You're going to bring in Knox. If you want to do more passing stuff, you want to create certain mismatches, especially in the red zone, maybe you bring both. If you want more slot production, you're probably bringing in Kincaid over Knox. But it's more just about how they're deployed rather than about who's one and who's two. And that's more or less what this comes down to. This is great, succinct from Steve Noble. Knox the total package to tight end. Kincaid is a special package to tight end. They play very different roles. Very succinctly and well put, Steve. I really appreciate that. It's just different roles. And it's not really about who's one and who's two. It's really just about getting guys in position to play their best game that they can. That's really what football is about, just putting guys in position to succeed. And I think the Bills are going to be able to do that with these guys and with a lot of these other guys. That's going to be it. I think that's going to be it. Once again, going to recommend Underdog Fantasy. Sign up using Cover One. You get $100 free deposit. We're going to be sort of rolling out some new stuff with Underdog Fantasy. I don't know exactly all the details on that. Some show this week is probably going to give you a little bit more detail. So stay tuned for that. One Pass, again, can't recommend it enough. $57 a year. It's totally worth it. It's so much fun. Game days is so much fun in that Slack channel. It's really great. You get just a really wonderful discussion, and it's probably a lot better than Twitter, let's be honest. Or I'm sorry, X. By the way, I turned off auto updates on my phone because I still have Twitter as Twitter. It's not X at this point, and I'm going to die on this hill before Elon Musk forces me to call Twitter X. It's not happening. So, to me, I will always refer to it as Twitter, and we're just gonna move on. Nobody really cares about what I'm doing on that. But the discussion on the Slack channel probably way better than Twitter. So it's probably worth the $57 a year just for that. The less time you spend on Twitter, the better you are. And then of course, just hit the likes, hit the subscribes. We'll get those comments in. I really do appreciate it. I will try to be a little bit more active in responding to comments once they hit the YouTube channel. Haven't really done a ton of that in the past. I'm gonna try doing more. I like interacting with you guys, and it's a lot of fun. I'm really, really glad to be able to do this. I am going to start working more on trying to find some guests because I don't want me to just be the only voice you hear on this podcast. Because it's very difficult for me to do an entire hour of just very, very specific topics. But I do enjoy doing this. I just like doing it with other people. It's a lot more fun that way. We'll see who we can get. But yeah, we're gonna keep this going, and glad that we are fully in training camp. We are fully into the end part of the off season. And if I am remembering correctly, and I will have my producer pull this up now, guys, Thursday, August 3rd, we have a real live football game. It's the Hall of Fame game, and it's probably not going to be all that interesting. It's the Jets and the Browns. Who really cares? But it's still football, and it's going to be on your TV. So I'm pretty excited about that. That's going to be it. That's going to be all for me. I will see you all next week with more training camp updates. Go Bills. Have a great night. We'll see you all later.